I want to learn how to communicate my feelings effectively. I've had a number of people come to therapy with this particular goal in mind. So you have one group of people who are saying, in the moment, I want to be able to say how I feel. Then you have another group of people who are saying, listen, I recognize that I'm a slow processor. I need to sit with something first and understand it and acknowledge it for myself. And then only do I want to be able to retrospectively speak about how I felt in a particular moment. Now, you could be any one of these two. Either way, we're going to talk about what will help you to be able to communicate your feelings effectively. If you've ever walked away from a conversation thinking, ooh, I didn't really say what I wanted to say, or that didn't come out the way that I wanted it to come out. So maybe you did try to express how you felt, but then you came across as aggressive or defensive, or as though you were trying to make excuses for yourself, and then you just shut down. Right? And that's because communicating your feelings is very hard, and it's something that we're actually not taught how to do. When I was preparing for this video, I was actually thinking that if we had learned skills like this in life orientation, now if you're watching from South Africa, then we do a subject called life orientation throughout school. This would be one of those great skills that we could have learned during our time there, because it's also in school where we keep on hearing the message, use your words, not your hands. Use your words, not your hands. But what words? We really don't know, and we are not taught. What we do learn is how to communicate passive-aggressively, how to avoid difficult conversations, how to explode when things don't work out the way that we want them to, because it's really hard, and it's really hard to communicate our feelings directly. But the good news is communication is a skill, meaning it is something that can be learned. Something else I want to say, for some people who come to therapy or who I've had conversations with who say, I struggle to communicate my feelings, what I've realized is that for some people, it's not really struggling to communicate your feelings in as much as it is a perfectionism problem. So some people really believe that unless you articulate yourself perfectly, then someone else will not be able to understand you. So if it was clumsy, if it was a bit incoherent, if you sort of caught it at the end and it didn't make sense at some points, then perfectionists will think, then I cannot be understood in that way. Now, that's not a communication problem in as much as it is a perfectionism problem, but that's a whole different topic altogether. Today, I want to talk about why it's hard to communicate our feelings, some communication patterns that exist, and then I want to give you one of the most effective communication tools that I use in therapy, which comes from Dialectical Behaviour Therapy models. And I think it will be very effective for you to just get a structure of how you can start to bring up difficult feelings and difficult emotional experiences. So let's get into it. Firstly, why is communicating your feelings so hard? The main reason is emotional socialization. We are taught what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, what is acceptable to express and what is not acceptable to express. And somewhere along the line, we then get these messages that are inculcated within us that tell us that it's not okay to communicate certain things and it's not okay to express certain things. And this is different in different situations. For some people, it might be that you grew up in a household where anger was really off bounds. You could not get angry, right? Or you could not feel sad because it meant that you were ungrateful. But on the other end, you might find some people who couldn't even express happiness. If you were too happy as a child, you were told, we are papa, and you need to keep your feet on the ground, right? So you might find some people struggle to communicate different feelings as a result of how they were socialized and what they were taught. When people do struggle to communicate their feelings, they normally fall within one of three communication patterns. One of those patterns is the passive communicator. So this is someone who avoids expressing their needs and their feelings. You might hear a lot of, oh, I don't mind, it doesn't matter, I'm fine, or it's fine. But internally, they're frustrated or they're really feeling dysregulated. Then you have the aggressive communicator. Whenever they try to bring something up, it normally comes up as though they are blaming someone else or being very accusatory towards someone else. You never do this, you always do this. And then that sort of triggers the other person to start feeling defensive. Then you have the passive aggressive communicator, and this is where feelings are expressed indirectly. So someone could be sarcastic, there could be subtle criticism, they give you silent treatment, or they withdraw. In all of these cases, you find that someone's real feelings are never really communicated directly and effectively. So now let's get to the how. I want to teach you the Dear Man method. This is a DBT skill that I use to help people know how to express themselves and their feelings while also learning how to negotiate and also respect themselves and the person that they're trying to speak to in that different moment. So I'm not going to say to you, if you want to communicate your feelings, you just need to do it calmly. I'm actually going to give you a structure and a formula for how you can start to bring up your feelings, whether it's in the moment or retrospectively. So let's break it down. The D stands for describe. So here you want to describe the situation objectively without interpreting, without making any judgments. So instead of saying, you never make time for me, you can say, I've noticed that in the past 2 weeks, we haven't spent a lot of time together. Then E stands for express how you feel about the situation. Now, a lot of people assume that if I've already told someone that I'm not happy with something that they did, then by virtue of that, I've already communicated how I feel about it. So if I've told you the situation, then you should be able to deduce how I feel about the situation. But it doesn't work like that. After you've said, hey, you were late, or hey, you haven't responded to my messages, you also want to communicate how that makes you feel. So in this case, you could say, I've been feeling lonely and disconnected. A stands for assert your needs. Don't assume. I'd really like us to plan something together this week. You're coming up with an actual plan and are communicating what your needs are. R stands for reinforce the importance of the request. So you can say something like, I think us spending time together will really help us to get to a point where we feel reconnected with each other again. Then the second part of the Dear Man method is the man part. So M stands for mindful. Here you want to be mindful and you want to stay mindful of the goal of your conversation as you have the conversation, because sometimes you find that someone else changes the subject or you start arguing about something that doesn't really have anything to do with why you brought the matter up altogether. So you want to remind yourself to stay mindful of what the goal is in terms of having the conversation. Then A is appear confident. Now I know you might be saying, hey, I'm listening to this video because I actually am not confident. That's why I'm here. But by confidence, what I'm speaking about is your ability to trust the validity of your emotions. You need to be able to believe and to trust that your emotions are valid so that you don't undermine what you are feeling when you're trying to express it to someone else. It's okay to be clumsy. It's okay to struggle to find the words. But if you aren't even convinced that your feelings are valid, then you can't expect yourself to communicate your feelings confidently. Then the last part is negotiate. You may need to be flexible because the person that you're talking to may not be able to meet your request exactly the way you imagined it. So if we can't make time to spend together this week, you could suggest, if this week is too busy for you, maybe let's try another time next weekend. So you're learning to negotiate, right? So learning to talk to people about your emotions. It's not just you talking at someone, it's you opening up a conversation to ensure that your needs are met. Right? So this is the Dear Man method. If you're enjoying this video, then it's probably because you're still trying to find the language for what's keeping you emotionally stuck. I've created a free quiz for you to understand and to identify what's keeping you emotionally stuck, what your emotional language and infrastructure looks like, and this will also give you access to resources that will help you get emotionally unstuck. If you would like further information, check out more information below. Let's continue with the video. I hope as you're listening to me speaking, you realize just how better that sounds in terms of communicating. Sometimes you start the conversation and you sort of start saying, hey, you were late. You're always late, and that's where it ends. But this will give you a structure. What do you say after you've highlighted the events that was upsetting? How do you then move from a point of the injury and the offense to a point of reconciliation, especially with relationships that you're hoping to nurture and to grow? Because learning how to communicate your feelings effectively takes practice. And for a lot of us, we weren't taught how to do this. Or sometimes it wasn't really modeled to you. Maybe you grew up in a household where your mom would refuse to dish up for your dad when she was angry, or she wouldn't speak to you for a week because you left your jersey at school. So it wasn't modeled to you, and you weren't taught how it is that you actually communicate when you're angry, when you're happy, when you're excited about something, when you're scared about something. So it takes time to learn, and it takes practice for you to learn. And the Dear Man method actually gives you a structure to be able to communicate and express those feelings in a way that helps you get closer to the people in your life. And the more you practice communicating this way, is the better your relationships will be, and the more they will begin to change. Because if you think about it, if someone approaches you in this way, you are less inclined to be defensive and also more inclined to hear them out. If someone doesn't come swinging at you, accusing you and blaming you of making them angry or upsetting them, but actually comes across as though they want to reconcile, but also expresses their emotions in a particular way, you are more likely to hear them out. Because as humans, even when you are wrong, if someone attacks you, your natural instinct will be to defend. You could be defending something that is very wrong, that even you know is very wrong, but because you were attacked, your natural instinct will be to defend. So when you try to communicate your feelings, you also want to give yourself the best shot at being heard. And that really comes into how you speak, because that will inform how well you are listened to, right? And listening is something that is very important. Esther Perel shows this great analogy that listening is something that gives shape to speaking. So listening is the shape of the bowl, and speaking is what then fills the bowl. And you would find that listening is actually what defines where the water or the words will land, because it's the shape of the bowl, and the speaking is everything that goes in with it. So I hope you try this out the next time you're trying to communicate how you feel, whether in the moment or after the fact, and let me know how it goes.